Commander Hyunwoo Kim straightened his uniform and took his seat in the massive Galactic Council chambers. The room was bigger than 3 football stadiums put together, with floating platforms and holographic displays everywhere. He had been to many diplomatic meetings before, but nothing quite like this. The message they received last week had been simple. Prepare for the most important announcement in galactic history. What he didn't expect was a comedy show. The Zephyrian hegemony had called this emergency session, and now Hyunwoo understood why. 12 different alien species marched into the chamber wearing the most ridiculous golden robes he had ever seen. They sparkled and shimmered with every step, making the aliens look like they were headed to some kind of space opera costume party rather than a serious diplomatic meeting. "Are those real crystals on their weapons?" whispered Ambassador Ji-Hai Park, who was sitting right next to him. She had been Earth's top diplomat for 15 years, trained to handle any situation with perfect composure. But even she was struggling not to laugh. The lead alien, who introduced himself as Supreme War Marshal something or other, with a name that sounded like he was clearing his throat, stepped onto the central platform. His golden robe was so long, it dragged behind him for at least 10 feet. 2 smaller aliens had to follow him just to carry the train. "Beings of the galaxy," the War Marshal announced, in a voice that was probably meant to sound threatening, but came out more like an opera. "Singer with a bad cold. We, the mighty Zephyrian hegemony, have remained at peace for 3,000 years, but no more." Hyunwoo activated his neural implant to start recording. His boss back on Earth was never going to believe this without video proof. The implant was completely silent and invisible, just a tiny device behind his ear that could capture everything he saw and heard. What happened next was the most elaborate performance Hyunwoo had ever witnessed. The first alien species stepped forward and began what could only be described as an angry dance. They hopped from foot to foot while waving their arms and making screeching sounds. According to the translator, they were reciting an ancient war poem about crushing their enemies like space dust. The second species did something even stranger. They formed a circle and began spinning while chanting in high-pitched voices. Their translation came through as, "The blood of our foes shall water the cosmic gardens of victory," but it sounded more like a children's nursery rhyme set to elevator music. Each of the 12 species took their turn performing these ridiculous war rituals. One group juggled glowing orbs while declaring humanity's doom. Another did synchronized swimming motions in the air while describing the terrible fate awaiting human civilization. The third group actually pulled out what looked like pom-poms and did cheerleading moves while threatening to obliterate the human menace from the stars. Ji-Hai Park was biting her lip so hard to keep from laughing that Hyunwoo worried she might draw blood. He wasn't doing much better. The whole thing felt like watching a high school drama club perform Shakespeare, except the students had never actually read the play and were making up the lines as they went along. The aliens took this very seriously, though. They had smoke machines creating dramatic fog effects. Colored lights flashed in time with their chanting. Some of them had even brought what appeared to be a full orchestra of strange alien instruments that made sounds like dying space whales mixed with malfunctioning air conditioners. After 2 solid hours of this performance, the Supreme War Marshal finally got to the actual point. He raised his weapon high above his head, and Hyunwoo had to suppress a chuckle. The thing looked exactly like the ceremonial letter opener he had seen in the Earth Military Museum last month during his nephew's school field trip. It was shiny and had fancy engravings, but it was about as threatening as a butter knife. "Humans of Earth," the War Marshal declared dramatically, "you have 7 solar cycles to prepare for your complete and utter annihilation. Your chaotic expansion through our galaxy ends now. Your disrespectful behavior toward ancient traditions must be corrected. Surrender your colonies, submit to our cultural rehabilitation programs, or face the full might of our combined fleets." The threat might have been more impressive if the alien hadn't tripped over his own robe while delivering it. 2 of his assistants had to help him back to his feet, and his fancy hat fell off, revealing what looked like a bald head covered in colorful spots. As the performance continued, Hyunwoo started paying attention to the aliens' technology. Their weapons looked impressive with all the crystals and glowing parts, but something seemed off. The energy readings his suit's sensors were picking up were surprisingly low. In fact, they were reading about the same power levels as the mining equipment they used on the outer colonies. Their communication devices looked like something Earth had used 50 years ago. Their holographic displays were fuzzy and kept flickering. Even their fancy robes appeared to be made from some kind of synthetic material that probably cost less than a decent dinner back home. The whole thing reminded him of visiting his grandfather's house, where everything was kept exactly the way it had been decades ago. These aliens seemed to be using technology that was probably cutting-edge 3,000 years ago, but hadn't been updated since. When the ceremony finally ended, all 12 alien species lined up and bowed dramatically. The Supreme War Marshal stepped forward one last time and announced, "We have spoken. The galaxy has been warned. Prepare for war, humans, for it comes whether you are ready or not." The chamber fell silent, except for the humming of the air recycling systems. All the aliens stared at Hyunwoo and Ji-Hai Park, clearly expecting some kind of terrified response. Maybe they wanted the humans to beg for mercy or promise immediate surrender. Instead, Hyunwoo stood up slowly and adjusted his uniform. He had been trained for diplomatic situations, and this definitely qualified as one of the stranger ones. With perfect politeness and a completely straight face, he responded, "On behalf of humanity and the Earth government, we thank the esteemed hegemony for this absolutely memorable presentation. We will certainly give your message the attention and consideration it deserves." The aliens looked satisfied with this response. They gathered up their robes, packed their instruments, and filed out of the chamber with the same dramatic flair they had used to enter. The Supreme War Marshal was the last to leave, pausing at the doorway to give Hyunwoo one final threatening glare before tripping slightly over his robe again. Once the chamber was empty, except for the two humans, Hyunwoo finally allowed himself to smile. Ji-Hai Park let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like hours. "Well," she said, "that was certainly something." Hyunwoo nodded and started uploading his recording to the secure diplomatic channels. His superiors on Earth were going to have a very interesting morning when they watched this footage. He had a feeling humanity's response to this war declaration was going to be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. This was definitely going to be interesting. Admiral Soo-Jin Lee was having her morning coffee when the priority alert came through on her flagship's communication system. The Soul's Pride, humanity's most advanced deep space vessel, had been patrolling the Outer Rim territories when the hegemony's official ultimatum arrived. She set down her cup and walked to the main tactical display, where her entire senior staff had already gathered. The holographic message began playing automatically as she approached. The same Supreme War Marshal from the council meeting appeared, but this time he was standing in front of what was supposedly the hegemony's main battle fleet. The ships behind him were enormous, dark, and covered in glowing symbols that pulsed with an ominous red light. "People of Earth," the War Marshal announced, his voice echoing through the bridge speakers, "you have witnessed our power. Now you shall know our demands. You will evacuate 17 star systems within 30 standard days. You will submit to our corrective cultural realignment programs. You will learn to respect the ancient ways of the galaxy. Refuse and face total annihilation." The message continued for another 20 minutes, showing detailed views of their war fleet. Massive ships stretching for miles, weapons that glowed with threatening energy, armies of alien warriors in battle formation. It was all very impressive looking, especially with the dramatic music playing in the background. Lieutenant Donghyun Chang was the first to break the silence after the message ended. He was the Soul's Pride's best tactical analyst, a young officer who could read energy signatures and weapon specs like other people read restaurant menus. "Ma'am," he said, trying to keep his voice professional, "I've run a complete analysis on their weapon systems. Their plasma cannons are generating approximately 2.3 terawatts of energy." Soo-Jin raised an eyebrow. "And that means what, exactly?" "Well, ma'am, that's about the same power output we use for standard asteroid mining operations. My uncle runs a mining station in the belt, and his equipment puts out more energy than their main battle cannons." Captain Min Ho-yoon, who had been studying the ship specifications on his personal tablet, looked up with an expression of barely contained disbelief. Admiral, I've been going over their fleet data. Their fastest ships are limited to sublight. Speeds may be 60% of light speed at maximum. No faster than light capability, except for basic jump drives. How basic are we talking? Su-Jin asked. The kind we stopped using 200 years ago, ma'am. The technology we have in our civilian transport ships is more advanced than what they're showing us as their primary military vessels. Su-Jin walked over to her command chair and activated the ship's main computer. She pulled up Earth's military response protocols and started scrolling through the threat assessment categories. There were protocols for dealing with advanced alien civilizations, unknown technologies, overwhelming enemy forces, and dozens of other scenarios. But there wasn't a single protocol for dealing with enemies who were technologically inferior by several centuries. While she was trying to figure out how to categorize this situation, news of the ultimatum was already spreading across human space. The crew members on duty were checking their personal devices between tasks, and Su-Jin could hear muffled laughter coming from various workstations. "What's so funny, people?" she asked. Ensign Yoo-Jin Kim, the communications officer, looked up from her console with a grin she was trying hard to suppress. "Ma'am, the civilian networks are having a field day with this. Someone created a meme comparing the hegemony threat to being attacked by their great-grandfather's antique hovercar. It's already been shared about 50 million times. There's more, Admiral," added Lieutenant Chang, pulling up social media feeds on the main display. "Look at this hashtag that's trending. Museum War. People are posting pictures of the hegemony. Weapons next to exhibits from military history museums. The similarities are, well, they're pretty obvious. The main screen filled with side-by-side comparisons. Ancient Earth weapons from centuries past looked remarkably similar to the hegemony's advanced technology. Someone had even found old instructional videos from military academies showing how the same type of jump drives worked." Su-Jin shook her head in amazement. How did an entire civilization manage to go 3,000 years without any significant technological advancement? "Maybe that's what happens when you're at peace for too long," suggested Captain Yoon. "No wars, no pressure to innovate, no reason to improve your military technology. They probably kept everything exactly the way it was when they stopped fighting." The communication system chimed with an incoming priority message from Earth. President Na-Young Choi appeared on the screen, broadcasting from the presidential office. She was standing behind her desk with the Earth flag visible in the background, maintaining perfect presidential composure. "Citizens of Earth and our colonial territories," the president began, "we have received the hegemony's ultimatum and have given it careful consideration. We acknowledge their unique approach to conflict resolution and thank them for the entertaining display of their cultural heritage. Earth's government is preparing a comprehensive response that will address their concerns while maintaining the dignity of all parties involved." It was a masterpiece of diplomatic language. Technically, she hadn't said anything insulting or dismissive, but anyone listening carefully could hear the barely contained amusement in her voice, especially when she emphasized the words entertaining display and cultural heritage. Within an hour of the president's speech, the Ministry of Defense released their official threat assessment. The document was classified, but Su-Jin had security clearance to read it. The summary was just 2 lines. Hegemony threat level, negligible, historical interest only. Recommend cultural preservation approach rather than military response. Cultural preservation approach, Captain Yoon read over her shoulder. "What does that mean?" "It means," Su-Jin explained, "that our biggest challenge isn't going to be defending ourselves against them. It's going to be responding to their ultimatum without completely humiliating them in the process." She walked back to the tactical display and pulled up the hegemony fleet specifications again. These aliens had probably spent months preparing for this moment. They had polished their ancient ships, practiced their war speeches, and worked themselves up for what they believed would be a glorious return to military dominance. They had no idea that their terrifying war fleet would be completely outmatched by a single human mining vessel, let alone actual military ships. "The problem is," Su-Jin continued, "they seem to genuinely believe they're a serious threat. If we just ignore them or tell them to go away, we'll destroy whatever dignity they have left. But if we take them seriously, we're essentially lying to them and the rest of the galaxy. Lieutenant Chang pulled up another social media feed. Ma'am, you might want to see this. Apparently, some comedy shows on Earth are already planning special episodes about the hegemony. One of them is calling it The Galaxy's Most Adorable War. Declaration. Sujin rubbed her temples. The situation was getting more complicated by the hour. Somewhere out there, an entire alien civilization was gearing up for what they believed would be an epic war. Meanwhile, humanity was turning their ultimatum into entertainment content. Set course for Earth, she ordered. I have a feeling we're going to need to have some very interesting conversations with our leadership about how exactly we're supposed to handle this situation. As the Soul's Pride began its journey home, Sujin couldn't help but wonder what the hegemony leaders would think if they knew their fearsome war declaration had become the galaxy's favorite comedy material. This was definitely going to require a very creative diplomatic solution. Cultural Minister Jae-sung Park adjusted his tie and stepped up to the podium at Luna Station's main press conference room. The place was packed with reporters from every major news network in human space, plus a few alien journalists who had shown up out of curiosity. Camera drones hovered silently in the air, broadcasting live to billions of viewers across dozens of star systems. Behind him, enormous screens displayed what looked like official government announcements, but if you looked closely, they resembled movie posters more than diplomatic documents. Bold letters spelled out the Galactic Comedy Festival with smaller text underneath reading a historic surrender ceremony. Jae-sung had been in politics for 20 years, but he had never had to deliver a speech quite like this one. The president herself had called him personally to explain the situation. Earth's response to the hegemony's ultimatum needed to be creative, diplomatic, and absolutely hilarious all at the same time. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all species, he began with the most serious expression he could manage. I stand before you today to make an announcement of historic importance. After careful consideration of the Zephyrian hegemony's ultimatum, humanity has reached a decision. The room fell completely silent. Even the camera drones seemed to hover more quietly, as if they were holding their breath. In the spirit of diplomatic cooperation and galactic peace, Jae-sung continued, his voice perfectly steady and official, humanity formally surrenders to the Zephyrian hegemony. We acknowledge their superior wisdom and ancient authority. Several reporters started to ask questions, but he held up his hand for silence. However, he added, we would like to cordially invite the esteemed hegemony leadership as our guests of honor to attend our official surrender ceremony. This historic event will be broadcast across all known networks so that the entire galaxy can witness humanity's respectful submission to their rightful authority. What he didn't mention was that the surrender ceremony was actually going to be the biggest comedy show in galactic history, and the hegemony leaders were going to be the unwitting stars of the whole production. Within hours of the announcement, the planning committee had assembled the most talented comedy writers, event organizers, and diplomatic protocol experts that humanity had to offer. The person they chose to coordinate the whole thing was Soo-Jin Kim, a stand-up comedian who had been making people laugh for 15 years and had a special talent for roasting people while making them think she was being polite. My job, Soo-Jin explained to her writing team, is to surrender to these aliens so thoroughly and dramatically that they feel completely victorious, while simultaneously making them look like the most adorable space opera villains in the history of the galaxy. The surrender ceremony was scheduled to take place at Earth's Grand Amphitheater, a massive venue that could hold 500,000 people and had holographic projection systems capable of broadcasting to every corner of human space. The hegemony leaders were given VIP seating right in the front row, complete with comfortable chairs, complimentary snacks, and programs explaining the evening's events. When the Supreme War Marshal and his entourage arrived, they were treated like conquering heroes. Red carpets, honor guards, photographers taking pictures, the works. They clearly felt very pleased with themselves as they took their seats in the places of honor. Soo-Jin Kim took the stage, wearing an elaborate formal dress that somehow managed to look both respectful and slightly ridiculous at the same time. She began her surrender speech with perfect diplomatic courtesy. "Mighty warriors of the hegemony," she announced, bowing deeply, "we humble humans come before you today to beg for your mercy and wisdom. Your impressively vintage weapons have shown us the error of our ways. Your charmingly retro spacecraft have demonstrated the timeless beauty of classical engineering." The aliens sat up straighter in their chairs, clearly pleased with what they were hearing. The Supreme War Marshal nodded approvingly at her words about their impressive and timeless technology. What the hegemony leaders didn't realize was that the entire human audience was struggling not to burst into laughter. Sujin's tone was so perfectly sincere that the aliens heard genuine respect, while the humans heard the most elaborate roast in comedy history. "We are particularly amazed by your commitment to historical preservation," Sujin continued. "The way you have maintained your original military technology for 3,000 years shows a dedication to tradition that we younger civilizations simply cannot match." Between the comedy acts, something even more impressive happened. Human. Military engineers were invited on stage to demonstrate what Sujin called our primitive human technology as part of the surrender ceremony. Captain Young-Soo Lim walked out, carrying what looked like a simple handheld device, maybe the size of a tablet computer. "To show our complete submission," Sujin announced, "our military leaders will now demonstrate the pathetic weakness of human weapons compared to your mighty arsenal." Captain Young-Soo aimed his device at a small asteroid that was visible through the amphitheater's transparent dome. There was a brief flash of light, and the asteroid simply disappeared. Completely. Vaporized in less than a second. The hegemony science elder leaned forward in his chair, looking puzzled. "Excuse me," he called out. "What was that device your captain was using?" "Oh, that?" Sujin replied cheerfully. "That's just a standard mining tool. We use them for clearing space debris and breaking up rocks for mineral extraction. Nothing." "Fancy!" Young-Soo nodded and casually pointed the device at a small moon that was drifting nearby. Another flash, and the moon turned into cosmic dust. "Very efficient for construction projects," he explained conversationally. "We've got thousands of these things in our civilian workforce." The aliens exchanged glances, but seemed to accept this explanation. After all, the humans were surrendering, so obviously their technology couldn't be that impressive, right? The ceremony continued for 3 hours, with comedian after comedian taking the stage to surrender in increasingly elaborate ways. Each performance was technically a formal concession speech, but written and delivered like a comedy roast. The aliens heard respectful submission. The audience heard the funniest show in galactic history. The evening concluded with the signing of humanity's formal surrender document. Sujin Kim read the entire thing aloud, and it was a masterpiece of legal comedy writing. Every single sentence technically admitted defeat, while describing the hegemony in terms that made them sound like participants in a children's school play. "We, the people of Earth, do hereby acknowledge our complete and total defeat by the magnificent and awe-inspiring hegemony, whose ancient wisdom and classical military traditions have shown us the true meaning of galactic warfare," Sujin read with perfect solemnity. The Supreme War Marshal stood up and applauded. His entire delegation looked absolutely delighted with humanity's respectful and thorough surrender. What they didn't know was that the broadcast had achieved the highest viewership ratings in galactic history. 47 different star systems had tuned in to watch humanity's surrender ceremony, and every single one of them was laughing. Social media networks crashed from the volume of memes, jokes, and commentary being shared across the galaxy. The aliens left Earth feeling completely victorious, having witnessed humanity's total submission to their superior authority. Meanwhile, humanity had just pulled off the greatest comedy show in the history of the galaxy, and everyone except the hegemony knew it. As Sujin Kim watched the alien ships depart, she couldn't help but smile. Phase 1 of humanity's response was complete, and it had gone better than anyone could have hoped. Now they just had to see how long it would take the hegemony to figure out what had actually happened. Mining supervisor Hai-Jin Song was having what she thought would be a perfectly normal Tuesday morning on New Busan Colony. She sat in her office overlooking the main excavation site, sipping her coffee and reviewing the day's work schedules. The mining operation had been running smoothly for 3 years now, extracting valuable minerals from the asteroid belt while providing a comfortable home for about 15,000 colonists. That's when the sky filled with alien warships. The first thing Hyejin noticed was the shadow. One moment she was looking at the familiar view of space through the colony's massive observation dome, and the next moment, dozens of dark shapes were blocking out the stars. She set down her coffee cup and activated the external cameras to get a better look. "Well, would you look at that?" she said aloud, watching as the hegemony's Grand War fleet arranged itself in what was obviously supposed to be a threatening battle formation. The ships were huge and covered in glowing symbols, floating in perfect rows like they were posing for a dramatic photograph. Her assistant, Min Seo Kang, burst into the office with her personal tablet in hand. "Supervisor Song, are you seeing this? The aliens are actually here. They're forming up for an attack just like in the old war movies." Min Seo was only 22 years old and had grown up watching classic space opera films. She was clearly more excited than frightened by the prospect of witnessing an actual space battle. In fact, she had already started live-streaming the whole thing on her social media account. "Should I sound the emergency alarm?" Min Seo asked, though she didn't seem particularly concerned about the answer. Hyejin thought about it for a moment. The colony's emergency protocols were designed for things like equipment failures, asteroid impacts, or life support problems. There wasn't really a specific procedure for alien fleet shows up to attack us with museum-piece weapons that probably can't hurt our mining equipment. "You know what?" she said finally. "Let's treat this like the special event it is. Get on the colony-wide comm system and tell everyone to grab some snacks and head to the observation decks. Also, see if anyone has those welcome banners left over from the Harvest Festival." Within an hour, New Busan Colony had been completely transformed. The observation decks were packed with colonists holding drinks and finger foods, chatting excitedly about the alien fleet hovering above them. Someone had found the banner-making equipment from the community center, and now colorful signs reading, "Welcome Warfleet," and "First War in 3,000 Years Collector's Edition" were hanging from every available surface. The colonists were treating the whole thing like a community festival. Kids were running around with toy spaceships, reenacting the battle formation they could see through the dome. Adults were taking selfies with the alien fleet in the background. Someone had even set up a small concession stand selling battle, snacks and warzone smoothies. That's when the hegemony decided to open fire. The first plasma blast lit up the sky like the most impressive fireworks display anyone had ever seen. Bright green and blue energy beams lanced down from the alien ships, striking the colony's outer hull with tremendous flashes of light and what should have been devastating explosions. Instead, the energy beams bounced harmlessly off the mining facility's industrial shielding, creating pretty light patterns but causing no actual damage. The mining equipment was designed to withstand asteroid impacts, solar flares, and the occasional accidental explosion from overzealous excavation work. Alien plasma cannons from 3,000 years ago barely registered as a minor inconvenience. Minor. Taeho Shin was operating one of the big excavation drills when the attack started. He looked up from his work, saw the light show happening overhead, and activated his suit's communication system. "Hey, nice fireworks," he called out cheerfully, waving at the alien ships. "Are you guys putting on a show for us? This is way better than last year's Independence Day celebration." The crowd on the observation decks cheered and applauded as each new blast created spectacular visual effects against the colony's shielding. Someone started keeping score of which alien ship had the prettiest energy beams. The blue ones were definitely winning. After about an hour of this, the alien fleet's flagship opened a communication channel. A deep, threatening voice echoed through the colony's speakers. "Humans of New Busan Colony, this is Supreme War Commander Zelthak of the Hegemony Battle Fleet. You have witnessed our power. Surrender immediately, or face complete annihilation. Hyejin activated the colony's external speakers and responded in her friendliest customer service voice. "Hello there, Supreme War Commander. Welcome to New Busan Colony. We're so excited to have you here. This is absolutely amazing. Our first real space battle. We've prepared some refreshments if you'd like to come aboard and join us. The kids were also wondering if they could get autographs from some real alien warriors." There was a long pause from the alien fleet. Apparently, this wasn't the response they had been expecting. The attack continued for another 2 hours, but it was clear that the aliens were running into some practical problems. Their weapons were designed for space battles against other ships, not for trying to damage a heavily shielded mining facility. It was like trying to knock down a concrete building using a flashlight. Min Seo kept her live stream running the entire time, providing commentary like she was covering a sporting event. Okay, looks like the ship on the left is trying a new attack pattern now, still not getting through the shielding. But those are some really pretty colors. Oh, and someone in the chat is asking if we're selling t-shirts. We should totally be selling t-shirts. The colonists had turned the whole thing into a community event. People were sharing snacks, taking pictures, and placing bets on how long the aliens would keep trying to damage equipment that was clearly immune to their weapons. Someone had even started a drinking game where you had to take a sip every time. An energy beam bounced harmlessly off the colony's hull. By the third hour, it was becoming obvious that the hegemony was running out of steam. Their energy blasts were getting weaker and less frequent. The pretty light show was starting to dim. That's when Hyejin had an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. She activated the external speakers again and addressed the alien fleet directly. Supreme War Commander Zelthak, you've been working really hard out there. Your weapon systems must be getting tired. Would you like to dock with our facility and recharge your power systems? We've got plenty of extra energy from our mining generators, and we'd be happy to share. The offer was completely sincere. New Busan Colony generated massive amounts of power for their mining operations, and they had plenty to spare. It seemed rude not to offer to help their visitors recharge their weapons so they could continue their attack. The response from the alien fleet was another long, confused silence. Meanwhile, Min Seo's livestream had attracted over 2 billion viewers from 30 different star systems. The chat was moving so fast, it was impossible to read, filled with comments in dozens of languages from species across the galaxy. Someone had started a betting pool on whether the hegemony would accept the humans' offer of snacks and autographs. The most popular bet was on whether the aliens would realize they were being live-streamed to half the galaxy as part of what was essentially a comedy show. After the weapons fire finally died down completely, Hyejin made one final announcement over the speakers. Well, that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for visiting New Busan Colony. You're welcome to stay, as long as you'd like. We've got guest quarters if you need a place to rest, and the community center is planning a welcome dinner for tonight. There's going to be live music and everything. The alien fleet hung silently in space above the colony, probably trying to figure out what had just happened to their devastating first strike. Below them, 15,000 human colonists were having the best Tuesday they'd had in years, and 2 billion viewers across the galaxy were laughing so hard they could barely breathe. This was definitely not how galactic warfare was supposed to work. Dr. Yeonwoo Park had been studying alien civilizations for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like what was happening across the galaxy right now. From his research station orbiting Saturn, he had access to the most advanced communication monitoring equipment that humanity had ever built. His job was to listen to transmissions from dozens of different species and track how they interacted with each other. Usually it was pretty boring work. Most alien civilizations kept to themselves, sending occasional diplomatic messages or trade negotiations. The galaxy was a big, quiet place where everyone minded their own business and tried not to cause trouble. That all changed the moment humanity's war with the hegemony began. Dr. Park's monitoring equipment started picking up more alien communications in the past week than he had recorded in the previous 5 years combined. Species that hadn't talked to anyone in centuries were suddenly broadcasting across multiple star systems. Civilizations that had been completely silent were activating communication arrays they hadn't used in generations, and they were all talking about the same thing: humanity's absolutely ridiculous response to the hegemony's war declaration. First species to break their silence were the Andromedans. These were ancient, peaceful beings who had been so terrified of the hegemony that they had hidden in their home system for over 2,000 years. They had cut off all contact with the outside galaxy, hoping that if they stayed quiet enough, the hegemony would forget they existed. Now they were broadcasting detailed commentary on humanity's tactics, like they were sports announcers covering the galaxy's most important game. The humans have employed what can only be described as weaponized hospitality, came the transmission from the Andromedan Council. By treating their attackers as honored guests, they have achieved something we never thought possible. They have made the hegemony look foolish without firing a single shot. Dr. Park nearly spilled his coffee when he heard that transmission. The Andromedans hadn't spoken to anyone outside their system in his entire lifetime, and now they were giving tactical analysis of human psychological warfare techniques. But the Andromedans were just the beginning. Within hours of their first broadcast, the crystalline makers activated their communication networks for the first time in 3 centuries. These were incredibly advanced beings made of living crystal, who usually considered organic life forms too primitive to bother talking to. They had organized viewing parties. We have established 17 observation centers to analyze the humans' approach to conflict resolution, their message read. Their method of defeating an enemy through entertainment rather than violence represents a fascinating evolution in warfare tactics. We request permission to study their techniques for our historical archives. The crystalline makers weren't just watching humanity's war with the hegemony. They were taking notes and planning to write academic papers about it. Even more surprising were the void dwellers, mysterious beings who lived in the empty space between galaxies and almost never communicated with anyone. They had activated dormant communication arrays that were older than human civilization just to follow the conflict. The small flesh beings have discovered truth, came their strange, echoing transmission. Fear defeats itself when met with laughter. We have observed this principle across many galaxies, but never seen it applied so effectively. Dr. Park was updating his research logs every hour as new species joined the galactic conversation. His communication officer, Yunbi Choi, was working overtime just to keep track of all the incoming transmissions. "Doctor, you need to see this." Yunbi called out from her workstation. "I'm picking up betting transmissions from 47 different civilizations. They're all placing wagers on how this conflict is going to end." She transferred the data to his main screen, and Dr. Park stared in amazement. Alien species across the galaxy had established gambling networks to bet on humanity's war with the hegemony. But they weren't betting on military victories or casualty numbers like you might expect from a normal war. They were betting on comedy. The most popular wager was predicting how long the hegemony's leadership could maintain their dignity, while being treated like theme park attractions. Other popular bets included guessing how many more memes would be created about the hegemony's vintage weapons, and whether the aliens would eventually figure out that they had become galactic entertainment. The odds were heavily favoring humanity's continued cultural victories, which wasn't even a category that had existed in galactic warfare terminology until last week. "There's more," Yunbi continued, pulling up another set of transmissions. "I'm intercepting internal communications from within the hegemony itself. It looks like their younger generation is starting to question what their leaders are doing." This was the most interesting development yet. Dr. Park had been studying the hegemony for years, and their society had always been rigidly hierarchical. Younger members of their species never questioned their elders' decisions about anything, especially military strategy. But now he was reading internal messages between young hegemony citizens who were completely confused by their leaders' approach. "To dealing with humanity. Why are we attacking the only species that actually seems to enjoy our company?" read one intercepted message. "The humans think we're entertaining. They're treating us like celebrities. Isn't that better than everyone? Being afraid of us?" Another message was even more direct. "I watched the live stream from New Busan Colony. Those humans were genuinely excited to meet us. They offered us food and wanted autographs. When was the last time anyone in the galaxy was happy to see us instead of terrified?" The young hegemony citizens had apparently been watching humanity's response to their leader's war declaration, and they couldn't understand why their elders were attacking people who were treating them with such enthusiasm and hospitality. Some of the intercepted messages showed young aliens sharing human memes about their own species and finding them genuinely funny rather than insulting. They were laughing at jokes about their vintage technology and retro military tactics. Dr. Park realized he was witnessing something that had never happened before in recorded galactic history. An entire generation of young hegemony citizens was starting to see their own civilization through human eyes, and they liked what they saw. For the first time in their lives, someone in the galaxy found them interesting and entertaining rather than terrifying. As he compiled his daily research summary, Dr. Park wrote what would later be considered one of the most important observations. In xenobiological history, the hegemony may have superior numbers and ancient military traditions, but humanity has achieved something far more powerful. We have made the entire galaxy laugh with us, not cower before our enemies. In doing so, we have transformed a potential war into the greatest diplomatic victory in galactic history. He paused and added one more note. More importantly, we have shown every species in the galaxy that there is an alternative to fear and conflict. Instead of making enemies stronger through opposition, we have made them allies through acceptance and humor. As Dr. Park sent his report to Earth, communication networks across 47 star systems continued buzzing with chatter about humanity's incredible response to the hegemony's war declaration. For the first time in thousands of years, the galaxy was talking to itself again, and they were all laughing together. Supreme War Marshal Vexthor stepped off his flagship's shuttle and onto the landing platform at Earth's main spaceport, expecting to receive humanity's final surrender. He had come prepared for a solemn ceremony where the defeated humans would formally hand over control of their colonies and submit to hegemony authority. His ceremonial sword was polished, his golden robes were freshly pressed, and his victory speech was memorized perfectly. What he found instead was a red carpet, photographers, and a welcoming committee holding signs that read, "Welcome to Earth's Comedy Central and Galactic Funny Business Headquarters." A cheerful human woman approached him with a big smile and what appeared to be some kind of program or schedule. "Supreme War Marshal Vexthor, welcome to Earth. I'm event coordinator. My young Lee, and we are so excited to have you here for today's special event. Right this way, please." Before he could ask what was happening, he found himself being escorted through crowds of humans who were applauding and taking pictures like he was some kind of celebrity. Children were holding up drawings they had made of his ship, and adults were asking for selfies with the famous alien warrior. The whole thing was completely confusing, but also strangely pleasant. Back home, people either feared the hegemony or ignored them completely. These humans seemed genuinely happy to see him, like he was a welcome guest rather than a conquering enemy. He was led into Earth's Grand Assembly Hall, an enormous building that could hold hundreds of thousands of people. The place was packed to capacity, with beings from dozens of different species filling every available seat. Massive screens showed the event being broadcast live across the galaxy, with viewer numbers climbing past the billions. President Na Young-choi took the stage and addressed the audience with perfect diplomatic composure. "Distinguished beings of the galaxy, we are gathered here today for a historic event. We formally acknowledge the hegemony's impressive military traditions and their 3,000 years of galactic authority." Vexthor nodded approvingly. This sounded more like the surrender ceremony he had been expecting. However, the president continued, "We believe that true strength lies not just in military might, but in cultural flexibility and the ability to adapt to new situations. Therefore, we invite our esteemed hegemony guests to demonstrate their versatility by participating in humanity's most cherished diplomatic tradition, collaborative comedy." Vexthor had no idea what that meant, but it sounded official and respectful, so he went along with it. Within minutes, he found himself seated at a small table on the stage, next to a human woman who introduced herself as comedian Soo-jin Kim. "Don't worry," Soo-jin whispered to him as the cameras rolled. "Just follow my lead. We're going to have some fun together." What followed was the most bizarre 3 hours of Vexthor's life. Soo-jin started by telling jokes about the cultural differences between humans and aliens, but in a way that made both species look endearing rather than strange. She would tell a joke about human habits, then invite Vexthor to share something funny about hegemony customs. At first, he was completely lost. The hegemony didn't really have a tradition of humor the way humans did. Their culture was built around honor, tradition, and military discipline. But Su Jin was so encouraging and the audience was so supportive that he started to relax and play. "Along, tell them about your ceremonial hat collection," Su Jin suggested during a break. "I bet you've got some great stories about those fancy headpieces." Vexthor found himself talking about the time he accidentally wore his formal battle helmet to a peace ceremony and couldn't see where he was walking because it was designed for intimidation rather than visibility. The audience laughed, but it was warm, friendly laughter that made him feel included rather than mocked. Commander Hyunwoo Kim watched from the diplomatic section, remembering the pompous alien who had threatened humanity's annihilation just weeks ago. Now that same alien was on stage, telling self-deprecating stories about his own culture and genuinely enjoying the audience's positive response. The real turning point came when Su Jin invited Vexthor to try telling an actual joke. She had written some simple material for him, stuff that would be funny but not embarrassing. He stood up nervously, looked out at the massive audience, and delivered his first intentional punchline. "Why did the hegemony warrior cross the galaxy?" He read from his notes. "Because someone told him there was a really good surrender ceremony on the other side." The audience erupted in applause and laughter. Vexthor stood there for a moment, stunned by the positive reaction. Then, for the first time in decades, he smiled. Not the formal diplomatic expression he used for official ceremonies, but a genuine, happy smile. Hyunwoo knew in that moment that the war was over. Not because one side had defeated the other, but because everyone involved had found something better than victory. As the evening progressed, more hegemony warriors joined the comedy acts. They told stories about their ancient military traditions, but in a way that celebrated their history rather than using it to threaten people. The humans responded with their own stories about Earth's chaotic approach to diplomacy and their tendency to turn everything into entertainment. The grand finale was the signing of what became known as the New Galactic Accords. Instead of a traditional peace treaty, the document established an annual comedy war where any interspecies conflicts would be resolved through roast battles and collaborative humor rather than actual warfare. Humanity was officially recognized as the galaxy's diplomatic entertainment coordinators, responsible for organizing these events and helping species work through their differences, using laughter instead of violence. Admiral Su Jin Lee, who had been promoted to Director of Galactic Comedy Operations, delivered the closing address. "Today we've learned something important about conflict resolution," she said, looking out at an audience that included representatives from over 50 different civilizations. "Sometimes the most effective weapon against aggression is refusing to take it seriously. The hegemony came here planning to conquer us through fear, but they're leaving as friends who've discovered that making people laugh feels infinitely better than making them cower." The ceremony concluded with the hegemony fleet preparing to depart Earth, but now their ships were carrying human comedy writers, meme specialists, and cultural exchange ambassadors. The plan was to establish comedy clubs and humor festivals throughout hegemony space, giving their people a chance to experience the same joy that their leaders had discovered on Earth. As Vexthor prepared to board his shuttle, he turned back to Su Jin Kim and the human delegation. "I came here expecting to accept your surrender," he said. "Instead, I learned that there are better ways to be strong than making others afraid of you." Su Jin smiled and handed him a small gift box. "What's this?" "A joke book," she replied, "for the trip home. And remember, if you ever need any material for your next comedy routine, just give us a call." The war was officially over, but more importantly, a new kind of peace had begun. For 3,000 years, the galaxy had maintained order through fear and the threat of violence. Now, for the first time in galactic history, peace would be maintained through shared laughter and the understanding that differences between species could be celebrated rather than fought over. As the hegemony fleet disappeared into hyperspace, Earth's communication networks buzzed with messages from civilizations across the galaxy, all asking the same question: when is the next comedy show? Humanity had won the war without fighting a single battle, and somehow everyone involved had come out better for it.